So good afternoon to everybody. I'm glad to be here. I hope that you are still glad to be here after 2.5 days. Let's see. I guess that I'm the last one in a row of presentations dealing with different, more or less serious and important issues related to European identity research, right? And what I was planning to do initially was indeed to be more following the line which I had been indicated to follow, namely to speak about methodology and what should be done to improve our skills in that direction if we want to tackle the European identity issue properly. But I could not resist the temptation to break out of the frame, you see, because things in the recent past have been so intensely bringing up issues which I think are more substantial than just only methodology. You see, I think that many more problems are at stake here. So just to drop into the current developments, that's Nicosia last afternoon, so maybe 20 hours ago, and I think that's a pretty good way of capturing what is going on and what has been going on on the European identity front over the last 2 decades. You see, so on the one hand, the good news is on the left. Even in Cyprus, people are becoming transnational, and when they communicate on European issues, they do this in multiple languages, adopting the appreciated multiple identity approach we have been taught to use when we want to talk about Europeans. So, Cyprians. How do you call them in English? Cypriots? No. Is it so? Because in German this has been considered to be politically incorrect. We have to call them Zyprer, not Cyprioten. So Cypriots speak Dutch nowadays when they protest. At the same time, while they do so, they want to fuck Europe, right? And they do it by adopting the very logic Europe is teaching them. So Europe has the euro money, but they have gas, you see, so they don't need our euro. They have learned to speak European, so to speak, when they make their demands. So that's an interesting dynamic to follow, and I think in a way it tells only this picture captures a lot of what is going on, and to begin right away with methodology, I must say that I've rediscovered my left Hegelian roots when speaking about Europe, because you can basically take any kind of picture related to this kind of dynamics, and you will see that basically every picture tells not only a story, but really the whole story. So you can find that many things in these few images which are displayed on this photograph, which could be really developed into a proper PhD project almost. So you can really claim that even when it comes to macro dynamics, as those connected with European integration, the totality is in the very small parts of it as well, right? As old Hegelians would put it. So what I'm going to do then is not to digress too much on methodology, although I will begin a bit from that angle, and in the first 2 to 3 steps of the presentation, which will take, depending on your patience, 1 to 3 hours. I can be quite flexible on that side. So we can have a break after 1 hour if you want. You just have to indicate. I will try to develop basically points I'm going to make in my very brief methodological introduction, which are related to conceptual issues. See, I think one of the main problems we have when we talk about Europe is really related to the in a way, the over-specialization of not only the European technocrats, right, when they do Europe, but also the people who study Europe, who in a way have adopted a similar kind of approach and are doing some kind of mantra when they talk about their very specific policy, business, be it agriculture, technologies, whatever. And this often then is connected with missing the very main points, which of course then boil down very much to the complex of identity, social integration, things we have been talking about here anyway the whole time, so I'm not going to repeat on that. So let me just begin with a few basic things which you know anyway, just to recapitulate things which are banal, obvious. I don't have to tell this to you. So when we speak of Europeanization, or when I do so, let me be more clear. When I speak of it, I have in mind basically two things, and I think this is not controversial. On the one hand, the successive, not concentration, but to some extent transfer of political authority to European Union authorities. So the regulatory capacities of the EU have been increasing since the very inception of the integration process. At the same time, and that's maybe the even more important point, it's not only so that Europe itself has become a more influential actor, also other actors which are not even connected to European business per se. So, for example, academic planners at German universities, some peasant lobbyists in Bavaria and so on, they will automatically have internalized the European dimension in the message they articulate in very specific localities of their own region. So Europeanization is something which means that Europe is present all the time, basically everywhere when we talk about politics. And that's maybe the more important aspect. So this doesn't mean that it's a smooth process, right? It's not kind of a logic which is being applied evenly in all kinds of policy and political fields. In fact, the very opposite is the case. We still do not know what Europe is about ultimately, so the finalité question has not been answered. It has been so rather that the question has become more and more an issue of contest, and that quite obviously since the breakthrough of the early 90s, and if you want, even living off this until the period of the Eastern enlargement, these dynamics hold. But since the early 2000s, we are in a period of setbacks, obviously. So Europe has been in crisis for a long time. And to paraphrase, and that's not a coincidence, the late, well, it's already a long time ago he died, the late and great social anthropologist Ernst, the main authority on, one of the main authorities on nationalism, who once told us that the course of true nationalism never did run smooth, right? That's the nations and nationalism. You can apply the very same to the logic of Europeanization. So it has never been kind of an even process, and even less possibly for reasons I'm going to discuss in a minute with you in the case of the EU, which lacks substantially from the non-finality of the event since its very beginning. So if we agree on this, let me just use this thing here. What are the challenges ahead? That's the question which I was supposed to be addressing in my presentation here, according to the organizers. I think mainly Viktoria and Ireneus, right? So I think that this is a simple story, and I think that in a way it's telling that this story could have been told in very similar terms 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and maybe even 30 years ago. So on the one hand, I think one of the main challenges remains the lack of, let's say, of grounding of the study of European integration, not only of European integration per se, that's a different topic, but also the study of European integration has been, in a way, wanting because of its excessive how could you put it, politicism, you see. So we have been moving more and more into extremely specialized fields of research. We have people working on Europe who will know everything about how many cows have to be killed in Western Silesia to be able to export this and that amount of meat to the UK, which then will become prosciutto ham in Italy and so on. This is the stories we're being told all the time. But who cares? You see, in fact, nobody except for the people who are doing that. So the problem is that beyond these circles, and there are many of these circles and many people living well of being active in these circles, the grounding has not taken place. And to recapitulate something which the integration theorist, one of the main authorities in this field, I would say, until today, Karl Deutsch, wrote already 36 years ago, writing about Switzerland. You see. So that's a text, a small book on Switzerland, on the process of creating the Swiss Confederation. But of course he writes this having Europe in mind too, you see, so that the technical skills, the virtu in Machiavellian terms will not be enough if there is not at some point a grounding of the process in some kind of social dynamics. You may want to call it civil society, you may want to call it bottom-up, whatever. So, but I think that's the one thing, bringing the social back in. It's not really happened yet, neither at the level of politics and policies, nor at the level of analysis. And then that's a second quotation which I find telling. This is by the, fortunately still living, also great sociologist Manuel Castells, who has been living between California and Catalonia for a while now, and he has a regular column in a Catalan newspaper, La Vanguardia, which is quite good for a social scientist. Normally we don't write good press articles, so I do not recommend that, but he's a great writer. And already 10 years ago, he was writing something about the EU after the elections of 2004, which were a low point in participation. You see what he wrote. I don't have to read it to you again. It sounds like it's the same story we are being told again and again and again ad nauseam. Okay? And I wonder what Manuel Castells would write today, because if we had a crisis in 2004, what are we having now? It's an interesting question. So was he overplaying it then, or are we not aware of the real challenges which are still ahead? So I think that in a way it's interesting in this respect that many contributions which I think are quite illuminating in the field of studying European integration, also European identity, have been produced by people who rather have been working at the periphery of EU studies. Not really people working in the specialized fields. So for example, the very name I just gave you, Manuel Castells, has some interesting insights in his network society. Also people like Perry Anderson wrote a great book about Europe, published a couple of years ago, The Old New World. So that's stuff which we will not discuss at our specialized ECPR meetings, typically, but which I still recommend reading to you. So if you agree with me on this, and I'm sure that many of you will not agree, so that's fine, of course we have to disagree. Let me try to adopt this very sketchy scheme to try to assess what is going now, what's going on right now, keeping in mind the picture which I showed you at the beginning of my presentation. So I think that on the one hand, and again, this is nothing which is revealing in any respect. Thus far, I've only been repeating stuff you know anyway from other people and possibly even people who have been talking to you here. So what we experience is obviously a lack of synchronicity between economic and political integration. We are still having something which you might call a stateless market. That's a book title by a Dutch sociologist of a book published in 1992. Paul Kaptein, The Stateless Market, you see. So the things he was analyzing then, already 20 years ago, still are on the agenda. You may want to say, unfortunately. So the one big point to make here then in this context is that we do not have the Europe of the citizens in the same way. We have obviously right now the economic and monetary union. That's something which has been working in powerful ways. I don't know whether well or not, but it exists. We do have obviously the Europe of the states. We have lots of intergovernmental business going on. What happened? I haven't touched anything.
Yesterday's update. Yeah.
Oh, yesterday this was my computer.
Oh.
But I may continue. I think it's also important to. So what remains weak is the civic part of Europe, and I think that again you may quote a great witness to just to frame it conceptually. We have in the terms coined by Albert Hirschman only interests when it comes to Europe and not many passions. You see, so people do not feel passionately European at all. People would, I'm not saying, I'm not normative, I'm only speaking as a sociologist here. People would have possibly liked excessively to kill each other 100 years ago in the name of France or Germany, and they did so, and there's nothing to be imitated, right? I'm not recommending this. But you don't have any sense of let's say, of passion, of feeling close to something for reasons which are not strictly instrumental when it comes to the EU. I think that's a main problem which is very much linked to the dynamics I was just describing. And I think that exactly in this aspect lies the relevance. Now I would like to have the slide. 2 minutes. Okay, I will speak slow, which may be good too. Here lies the relevance of the old question of European identity. So I think that when we talk about this thing, we should forget totally metaphysics and the classic canon of the roots of our civilization, Judeo-Christianity, the Greek philosophers, the illustration, all this stuff. Okay, it's there, but it's nothing which is specifically European at all. It doesn't help us in any respect. I think that the issue rather is to find an approach to social and political integration that could transcend national principles, which after all are those which seem to be counting still today. So we have to think more of identity in terms of praxis. So it's not about telling what people are or what they should be. We typically have normative overload when we approach people from that angle. I think it's more about telling what people do, right? And how they do it when it comes to identity issues. And I think that in this respect, again, I'm repeating myself, but that's the main claim, which I would like to be able to make with some visual support, which I will get in 1 minute, that the main, let's say, practical difference between becoming a citizen of any given or not yet given nation state lies in the importance the element of diversity has for finding a practical approach to being a citizen of the European Union. So I think that in this respect, the official motto of the European Union, which to some extent, as you know, failed as an official motto because the Constitution did not come through, namely, united in diversity does make sense. For one time, it's not some kind of Eurospeak bullshit, but something which can be used with some sound conceptual intentions. At the same time, so, and that will be the main point of my whole paper or my presentation as such, we have to be more ambitious when we talk about this. So if we move beyond political rhetoric, becoming united in diversity is a challenge that really has massive historical dimensions. If we look at the legacy of European modernity, embodied by the institutional framework of the nation state, which is a framework basically built upon normative monism on the one hand and cultural homogeneity on the other hand. right? It's very much a universe which also was present to some extent in the picture from Cyprus. You see, so we are Cyprus, you are Europe, fuck you. That's the old national legacy of being European, so to speak. And of course, what we see here is what you call, in a relatively fortunate German term, die Gleichzeitigkeit des Ungleichzeitigen, the simultaneity of the non-simultaneous would be maybe the English translation of it. Namely that whereas we have big discourses on what it is to be cosmopolitan, post-national, and so many other interesting things to be, we also have a massive continuity of what I call thin nationalism. So thin nationalism, the weight, the old legacy of nation-state history, of national histories, of ways of collective identity formation, which are basically national, is still very much permeating the whole universe of European politics too. So that we have at the very same time, you see, just to talk about what's going on right now, we have, if you want to remain optimistic, I'm not totally pessimistic yet, we have the process of creating the European Union, which can be framed as a construction of a post-sovereign polity, post-sovereign in the sense that it transcends the very legacies of the nation state, so that means to be united in diversity in a way. At the same time, we do have then the deconstruction, if you want, of sovereign polities. We have massive secessionist pressures right now, on the one hand in Scotland, in the UK. The UK might disappear, right? It doesn't look like that, but it still could happen, theoretically. We have similar things going on in Catalonia, which I know better in Scotland. So the old fights of the 19th century are still being fought in many parts of Europe. And then we also have the reaffirmation of state sovereignty, Hungarian style, we see, which is an odd thing to happen too, but which is very much an anachronism, if you want, which does not match the expectations of post-sovereign polity building perfectly, but it plays, obviously, thank you, a major role in current European politics. So I am already here now. If we want to tackle the conceptual challenges, I think, which I tried to make out, we have to ask what unity would mean in concrete terms, and I think that the answer lies indeed in the next concept which follows in the motto, namely in diversity, that we are talking about a unity which is highly complex, and which would transcend, obviously, the notions of thin nationalism with which politicians and many other people tend to play all the time when they act as politicians. So this is the praxis I'm having in mind. Just to get back again, I think that will be the last time today, in my case, to the case of Cyprus, to exemplify what I'm telling. Obviously, when we look at what's going on there, the interest conflicts are framed as conflicts between national players, basically. So it's not Cyprus against the EU, even. It's more or less Cyprus against Germany, which is happening there. Nobody seems to take a European stance at all, right? Also, it is true that the discourse of the national interest is often then at the same time put in a way, displayed in a way which internalizes the European component. Right? So we do have, to some extent, a triggering down effect of Europeanness into the national discourses, but it's not so that the national identities would dissolve at some point into something more European. Okay, so the challenge which I'm talking about is definitely not a minor one, and I think we have to be very, very aware of the challenge as said. You see, that's not a minor endeavor. So why diversity in the first place? Why is diversity so important? I think, on the one hand, for quite banal reasons, again, if you look carefully at the European political discourse, so at Europe's constitutional language, you might want to argue, as I do, that diversity is a core concept in the normative justification of the European project. And in my view, again, it is the sole concept that makes a genuinely new contribution to integration, to the integration discourse. So all the other things like social capitalism, human rights, democracy, there is nothing which you could claim as something specifically European. You could do the same things in North America and in many parts of the world too, right? It's nothing which makes us specifically European in our identity building approach, but diversity does so, right? And I think it's also something which is radically new in terms of its historicity, because diversity is a term which doesn't really exist as a major concept in political discourses of any kind before 1968. That's interesting too, you see. So you have, on the one hand, a massive explosion of diversity-oriented discourses in theory, in political and social theory, as of the late 1960s. This continues. And at the same time, you have a relatively interesting parallel adoption of this term in the Europeanist debate. That's striking too. And this raises many questions. One, in fact, it's really almost a linguistic exercise, is to try to disentangle the political semantics of diversity, because it's not a simple concept at all. No, one of the best questions you can ask if you want to address the meaning of a concept is what is the opposite of the concept? Right? And to find an opposite to diversity in English is not that easy. You might say uniformity, but it's not exactly it's not the semantic opposite. In German, it's easier because you have Vielfalt for diversity, and then Einfalt has something more specifically dual, right, in German, than the Latin term uniformity would entail. So it's a tricky thing, and you see that we have a whole semantic field of concepts which are not very clear anyway. The field I try to map here. And then, of course, all this begs the question why diversity is so important in the context of European integration and European identity, and how this relates then to our understanding of social and political integration as it is and should be nowadays. So, the one thing then to stress is the novel element which the concept carries in contemporary political discourse in comparison with the past. And I could really, I made a joke saying that I would talk about 3 hours, but I could easily, if I wanted, to show you let's say the background of all these issues in a systematic and sound way. I would need at least 3 days, right? But I just take 2 proxies to show that I am right, and I think the 2 proxies are relatively prominent, so you will be fine with that. If we look at the 2, let's say, key theories of the 2 main political ideologies or even theories, if you want to put it in a more neutral way, of modernity, namely John Stuart Mill, who you can say is the main theorist of what you could call liberal nationalism, and then Karl Marx, who does the same thing for what you might call socialist internationalism. Both authors, right, for different reasons, have a very skeptical approach to diversity. So diversity is something which does not fit the modern image of politics well from the beginning, for reasons which Mill states clearly here, and this is still present in current debates on Europe. So you cannot create a proper multinational democracy for reasons he's specifying here. You need a public sphere which is culturally and linguistically integrated, unless you do not want to end like Belgium or even worse Yugoslavia and maybe Europe one day. So that's the liberal nationalist cause. And for the other side of the coin, Karl Marx, Diversity is something which is totally, let's say, it's what you call ein Nebenwiderspruch in old Marxist language. It's not the main contradiction. The main contradiction is just workers against capital, and everything which distracts us from this contradiction, be it gender issues, culture, Jewishness, the Irish question which he approaches here. We have to tackle it tactically, but it has no value of its own, right? It's only about equality and the workers' universal republic. So in both in the liberal and in the socialist collective imagery, diversity has a weak status, right? And of course, we're not talking about theory here, we're talking about real politics. What is even more important is that it didn't have a major status in the political development of the West either. Just to cut a long story short, you see, what you do have as the outcome of modern political developments in Europe is exactly this kind of map, which is a simple. This is the most primitive picture you get if you want to describe what we have called what we're calling methodological nationalism. You have discrete political units, all uniformly framed, with borders a specific color, or all are uniform internally and are different to each other by different colors and so on. So that's exactly what let's say, what Mill was having in mind, more or less, what we get in reality, and exactly this universe keeps very much reverberating in present-day Europe. So political modernization has implied very much cultural homogenization, with massive costs for those involved, because to create this map was not some kind of smooth process, as Gellner put it, right? So to create this map entailed millions of death, casualties, entailed massive ethnic cleansing all over the place. So I don't have to tell you this. But it was not exactly a celebration of diversity, what happened in the last 200 years of European history. So we are supposed to get beyond that, right? And if we want to get beyond it, we have to understand, first of all, to avoid the dichotomies which Mill and Marx tended to operate with. We have to be clear that when we speak of diversity, of course, we speak of cultural diversity. We speak of something which has not per se a causal connection with social inequality, for example, and which should not be conflated with forms of inequality which must be considered unjust, you see. So we have this debate often when we talk about issues related to immigration and so on, that people are being blamed for not speaking German well, or not speaking French well, or not speaking whatever language well, and so on. And then it's about about assimilating them, and so on. The point is not their language, their culture. The point is social equality, which may or may not be related to factors which are linked to cultural diversity, and to what extent they are or not. This is an issue which will ultimately be decided only in the realm of politics. There is no kind of clinical way of telling this is culture and this is politics, and we don't mix it, right? So that's the point, and of course that makes the politics of diversity to a battlefield of entrenched and long-lasting cultural politics all over Europe. So to proceed now, how can we get then, how can we tackle some of the challenges which I tried to describe in this introduction? I think one important step is to this sounds like a pleonasm, right? Like telling the Catholic Pope to speak of complex diversity, because diversity, of course, is complex anyway. But I think that it does make sense, after all, to use this term here, because it helps. At least it helps me in showing what I would like to show. Typically, you would have when we approach diversity in terms of cultural diversity, the way I have been doing it so far, we have this classification in majorities. So that's the normal way of being a European. You are just a standard Brit or German, and you will belong to majority, which has found its place on the map I showed you. You are okay, basically, with And in the modern world, if you belong to Group B, so you are a Tyrolean in Italy, or you are a Welsh in the UK and so on, you may be not that okay, right? In a way, you are a victim of nation building, but still you will get something, because after all, we have learned that it's not good to kill people anymore. You have to accept some kind of minority status, and you will get it not as, you will not be on the map proper, right? You will not be on the map, but you will get some exemptions which may make it more bearable for you that you are not on the map. So that's what you call then minority protection. And then you have all the new minorities, which are groups formed by immigration, which has been a massive phenomenon in Europe over the last 5 decades. And they have changed the map of our environment. Even Jena, you see, quite a bit over the last couple of years. So these are the groups. And let me just, as a sociologist, who I tend to be as well, stress that we are talking here of concepts which are relational. So we cannot define them internally. You can only define them in a field of contextualized interaction of one group with at least one other group. So the very meaning of being German may vary radically from one place over space and over time, you see. So that's it, to put it in a nutshell. There is no way of being German except for doing it. Again, to repeat my praxis-related approach. What this now tells us is not so much, but it's still important in terms of the political implications this has, and also in terms of European identity politics, which ultimately is my topic. So the articulation of groupness according one of these criteria, the articulation of diversity in our societies entails basically claims for recognition. So identities want to be recognized. They want to get rights. These rights will assign status to people, depending on which group they belong to. So you get something for your identity. It's not a trivial exercise in being culturally authentic. You will get, in the first place, resources, right? You will get schools, public television. You will maybe even get some regional authorities where you can hope that your children will get jobs and so on. So it's not only about being authentic, it's also about being technically, let's say, successful. So in this respect, we do then have, in the context of group relations, different types of institutionalized recognition practices, which will lead to different grades of recognition, of a grading of status between different layers of diversity. And finally, you will get a very much, let's say, more fluid and open process related to this very dynamics in a context where sovereignty is undergoing significant transformations, as I put it here, where it's being challenged from many respects, and that's where Europe comes in massively, because things have changed in this respect quite a lot due to European integration. So the map which I showed you, I'm not going to show it again, is still there, but its meaning is not quite the same anymore. And this is so basically for 2 reasons. On the one hand, and that's the good news, which I told you that I would not talk about Cyprus anymore, so I won't. So it's so for 2 reasons. On the one hand, and this is a very old story. You do have spillover effects of the European identity discourse as it has been coined and framed, and in a way also monopolized by state actors, by intergovernmentally powerful actors. So it's not the minorities who have been using this discourse. It's more or less our political class, our normal representatives, but they still could not avoid that the discourse has been passed to others and it's being used by others. So not only has state nationalism been tamed, that was the main intention of the diversity discourse, so we will be Europeans, in the first place, and then in the second place, Germans, French, whatever, for the sake of being prosperous and not killing each other, which is a very sound way of approaching realities. Why not, okay? So that's the one thing. At the same time, you do have then legal consequences of this discourse, which, for example, are quite concretely palpable in the context of defining the European citizenship regime, which cannot be then only assigned to people who are strictly speaking European citizens. So also legal residents, migrants, must have similar rights, and it's very difficult to stop this normative expansion of the concept of rightful diversity claims from one group to the next, right? So this is what you may call spillovers, and at the same time you have the concept of Europeanness, of European citizenship, which in a way cuts across the different layers. So all these people which I showed you, the majorities, the different types of minorities, can be European in different ways. So what complex diversity means then is not only that we are more sensitive of diversity all over the place, so we are realizing that there are many different groups which are not exactly framed according to majority standards, and we accept this. Even ourselves, we tend to internalize this. We don't see ourselves that much anymore as the typical standard German a la nation-building handbook of 1914 or so, right? So the way of being French, British, German, at least for some people, has changed in ways that make basically the European citizen to a person who is to some degree even internally heterogeneous, as you would put it, quoting a French philosopher, a stranger to him or herself, right? So that's the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so that sounds interesting, and I think that's exactly the normative edge we would like to emphasize. Many people have done so insistently, like Jürgen Habermas, many others, Ulrich Beck, all the time. They would push us in that direction. And normatively, I guess, again, you may have different views of that, but I think it's not the worst news to spread, right? The question now is, let's look at the empirical ground. What has happened there? To what extent has the EU been able to develop according to its own normative promise, which some people may be overplaying to some extent? And I think here, I've worked a bit on this, so I'm not going to bore you. You may read it, and even in some of the stuff I circulated beforehand. I think the issue is that the normative promise has, to put it in one sentence, it's not being kept, you see. So I think the things are much more, not even complex, but complicated. Because you do have, on the one hand, you do have this symbolic and recurrent and permanent celebration of diversity as the European thing. So let's be European means let's be diverse. At the same time, and again, I'm not telling this because I think it is so. Just look at the Lisbon Treaty, look at all kinds of recent policy programs. You will find diversity as a topic. Just make a quantitative analysis of the content of any document and count how often diversity appears there. You will see that I'm right. Okay? Maybe some of you are doing this anyway. At the same time, then, it's never specified what it means in proper political terms to be united in diversity. So ultimately what you get is nothing else than a pretty unappealing replica of what you might consider intergovernmental non-aggression pacts or so. So you will never insult some people have started doing so recently, but normally you would not have insulted the German chancellor because she's German, or not the Italian voters because they are Italian. So this was part of this diversity game. You would keep some forms, but it's never been much beyond that. So you have a very strong encapsulation of the diversity discourse within intergovernmental structures. And then what you do have on the top of it is a massive, let's say, use of diversity in terms of facilitating market integration. So it's very much a token which in a way makes it easy to be diverse and different because it doesn't really matter. Right? It's a very reduced appreciation of diversity, which makes it ultimately, as I put it, permissive. You can be so insisting on it because it doesn't mean much at all. And you can see this basically in two respects. On the one hand, you see that when it comes to deeper recognition practices of the kind I tried to sketch out in the previous part of the paper, recognition is always biased towards nation-state identities. So there is no way of transcending this. At least nothing I would be aware of which could compensate for the total dominance of thin nationalism still in this kind of the apparently diversity-sensitive context. And second, even when we get then some type of recognition of minority languages or other group features, you do have a massive differentiation between old and new minorities, so European insiders and outsiders within the transnational citizenship regime. So what this entails then is that European identity boils down to a mere addition of identities which are entrenched in the system of interstate negotiations of different kinds. So you do not have anything which would transcend this kind of permanent bargaining, and this of course then leads to something which Jürgen Habermas and other people do not like, but which is in fact the truth. I think that the concept loses its normative edge, which it does have, I think. I would agree with that, but we have not been able to develop it fully, or not even half of it, or not even 1/3, for the reasons I tried to summarize here. I'm talking for 45 minutes now, so I will try. I will skip the next point, which is more. This is again about methodology, but if you read the text which I gave you, we can drop it here because it's very much based on that, and we can maybe discuss it later. So what I would like to do, at least very briefly, because this was a very abstract and general approach to this conceptual debate, which I think is still important, but maybe it was too abstract and too general. I would like to take 5 to 10 minutes to be able to elaborate on it in the field of migration, politics and policies. Is this okay, or are you already overblown with? Let me know. No, honestly, I respect. If you say no, I'll stop here. Who wants me to stop? Who wants it to continue? Well, that's a small minority at least, and better than nothing. Okay, so let me just go ahead with that. I think I already mentioned Habermas, and indeed, you see, so the logical bet. And the logical bet, which is also a normative bet, people like Habermas would make. This I just take from a brief piece he published in 2008, I think, Europa und seine Migranten. It's a lecture he gave when he got one of the many prizes he gets all the time. He would say, and this is a recurrent approach which you will find in the press and many other places day by day, that the empathy of being a European citizen. Sorry, the value of being a European citizen lies in the empathy which we will feel toward other Europeans, and this again will grow to the extent that we are exposed to diversity at home. So that's why it cherishes immigration. So the more we are exposed to be it European or non-European immigrants in our immediate environment at home, in Jena, in Edinburgh, in Madrid, in Paris, wherever, the more we will open ourselves and escape our national forms of life, become cosmopolitan, as he puts it. And the trick then is that, according to Habermas and many other people, Beck has a similar approach. You may call it, to some extent, polemically, a naive cosmopolitanism. The more you are within social cultural dynamics of this kind, the more you will feel properly European, transnational, and so on. So that's the normative side of this. There is also a sociological side of this discussion, which again can be exemplified with an author you also, I think, most of you know, Flickstein, right? Euroclash, a book published in 2008, and this is a plain half economic, half political sociology of creating a European society with stronger and weaker moments. Anyway, I just want to show you the way Flickstein argues. So he thinks, and as he thinks the European Commission, by the way, that the so-called Eurostars, so elite, highly skilled migrants and shuttle migration are important components of intra-European migration flows. That's true, right? And you could expect, obviously, and that's the expectation the Commission has anyway, that these people really physically and socially anyway embody European identity, and in good ways. I will get back to it in a minute. So we are talking about very much middle-class based people, even upper middle class, who are doing a good job at different places and feel to some extent as Europeans. There is also the book, an interesting ethnographic study by Adrian Fabel. So you may want to look at that. Nevertheless, and that's a point you have to acknowledge in Flickstein's work, that he's aware of the fact that even if this is so, precariousness, as he calls it, and ambiguity remain characteristic of European identity, and especially when it comes to people who are not from this select group of highly skilled middle-class background, right? So the more you leave this group, the worse it gets. And according to Flickstein, that's really interesting. I found this rereading the book a couple of days ago. He writes, that's the conclusion of his book, it would require an extreme and common political or economic crisis to widen and deepen a sense of being a European among a larger population of the citizenry. So to get further than that, we would need exactly what we have now, right, according to Flickstein. And see what happens. Right? I don't have to answer the question. But that's telling in itself. So let's look at what happens indeed. So when we look at the process as such, if we look at intra-EU migration, right, we see that we are talking about a very small phenomenon in demographic terms. Only 2 to 3% of EU citizens live in other European countries. I think many of you do, but we are not a majority, right? It's an anomaly. And all in all, in the member states, EU nationals represent 1/3 of the foreign population. So the country, which is a country where this percentage is the highest, that's a no-brainer. Exactly, right? And then if you go to, for example, Finland, it gets worse. So you have no foreigners at all, and then even Europeans are not very frequent there. The thing is not a big thing, but still, also it's not a big thing. Intra-EU migration has become increasingly politicized. I think Hans-Jörg may have told you about this in his presentation, in connection with the general rise of anti-EU forces across the whole political spectrum. So the paradigm of this, and my apologies to you, is the Polish plumber, you see. So this has been a breaking point in changing the discourse, and this was well before Habermas and Flickstein published their work. So I don't know how they would tackle this phenomenon. Anyway, to look at the figures, you see. So in Germany right now, I'm following this closely. I'm working a bit on this now. See, intra-EU migration in the Euro crisis, and that was a headline of the Spiegel a couple of weeks ago. So Southern Europe, Spain, Germany's joy, you see. So they are going down the drain, and we benefit from that. It's a good way of putting it. And indeed, we do have a significant increase of immigration in Germany in 2012. I don't have to read the numbers. And substantially many people indeed from Southern Europe. But still, it's nothing which is mind-blowing, you see. So it's not, the phenomenon is not as massive as it would appear in the discursive construction of the phenomenon. That's an interesting point to make anyway. So that's the one side of the medal, which you have here. The other side of the medal, so that's the German side. If you look at Greece, for example, that's a picture from Greece in November 2012. And you would get similar pictures in other parts of Europe right now too. I'm struck. I travel often to Spain and other Southern European countries. The level of anti-German feelings there are it's so impressively high. I've never had this before in my. I'm already an old guy, you see. So it's a striking thing to happen. I would not have expected this to be the case. And we do not have a clear division line between the German politicians, the German government, and Germany. It's a attribution of collective identity and collective interest. So we are being, if I may I be rude, drastic. So as you would hear in Greece, they tell fuck Europe because they feel that they are being fucked by bureaucracy. So that's the very bottom line of it. And then Europe is not Europe, but the German consul, for example, in Saloniki, and this kind of people. So we have an open tendency to blow up the capsule of safe and sound European identity and to go back to more old-fashioned and nasty identity patterns. Okay, so to summarize, and I'm really now finishing. We do have, I think that's something Hans-Jörg may have been doing recently. I don't know if you have been working on this, but I've tried to collect a bit of media material on that. You do have something which you might call as opposite to the stirs about the Polish plumber in France 10 years ago, or almost 10, 2004-05. You do have a celebration of, you might call, the Spanish or the Italian engineer. So they are wanted people. We like them, at least in Germany. Whereas in France, interestingly too, so this is not synchronic, you do have a continuity of the Polish plumber syndrome. Just to give you a headline of Le Figaro, that was again also November 2012. They complain that cheap labor from Eastern Europe, basically intra-EU migrants, are causing a loss of net income among the French working class, right? So that's the simultaneity of the non-simultaneous. And to get to my conclusions. So what can I tell you now about not only conceptual challenges ahead, but even in a way political challenges which we should be aware of when we work with the concepts we work with. I think that to begin with, we can detect indeed what you might call an elective affinity between the celebration of diversity and the priorities of market integration in the official, or if you want, constitutional European discourse. At the same time, in the context of this very discourse, diversity has become more and more subordinated to the criteria of economic freedom. If you have read the Süddeutsche yesterday, for example, there was a great piece about how Bavaria is trying to improve the facilities for receiving highly skilled foreign working force, right? To stay in Bavaria, to attract, let's say, human capital. They are okay, right? But it's not about diversity, it's about human capital, ultimately, what they want to. Bavaria doesn't want to get more diverse, the very opposite. They want to attract human capital. At the same time, we are having then, within this kind of diversity setting, an increasing divide between the North and the South, and it's unclear where some countries will find themselves. Maybe they are on the very line, like France, Belgium. They have not decided whether it will be in the South or in the north yet. And it is in this context then that diversity becomes politicized in ways we would not have expected maybe not even 10 years ago. And it's more something about being a winner and loser of the dynamics of Europeanization as we know it. It's not about creating a new kind of polity. And finally, I think we have to be careful not to make strong sociological extrapolations, because at all levels there is a high amount of contingency. So as we have seen after 4 or 5 elections in the last 2 or 3 years, everything can happen anytime, everywhere. So nothing is fixed, right? So the complexity is also linked to radical contingency. So the role of politics increases dramatically. Unfortunately, we don't have the politicians which would be able to make use of this opportunity window in proper ways, at least not so far. So to get to the very last conclusions, I think that the prospects are not too good, to be honest. So I hope that that my conclusions will be, let's say, contradicted in the near future by coming developments. But I think that the promises of the 90s have not been met, and that the normative expectations the EU has been able to meet so far, the normative delivery of the EU has been, to put it very politely, sobering. It's been a disaster, to be more clear. And not from a strong normative. So I'm not Habermas or back here. I'm just taking people at face value. I'm just telling them, what did you tell us and what have you been doing since 1992? Not much, really, rather the opposite. And second, I think it's even worse than that. Not only are we not having a jump to something different and possibly even better, I think we are in the very danger of not getting more self-reflective openings, but self-interested or self-aware closures, which will make us cherish the Spanish engineer, but not the Spanish guest worker, who was still welcome some 50 years ago, you see. So he will not be that much welcomed anymore, if I'm correct with this assessment. But again, it's contingent times, and I will finish here. But let's. I'm not going to compare myself to him, unfortunately. Yeah, do you have questions? Maybe we begin with that, related to the paper, and then we can talk more about maybe the business that should have been tackling more, let's say, ambitiously in my paper, so methodological issues and challenges related to this kind of approach. So, of course, the whole presentation, although it was a bit maybe too political and presentist, right? It the question, I think, how to tackle identity-related issues properly in research and European integration. So I think it's still, the question has not disappeared from the map. It's still crucial. I just think that we have to be aware of the very politics of it, even in terms of the academic context. Okay, but let's start with a round of questions, and I will try to structure the debate a bit more into the direction of methodology and theory. Yes, please go ahead.
My question is not about methodology.
Can you tell me, because I don't know you?
Yes, my name is Michał Matlak. I am a PhD student at the EY in Florence and at Willy Brandt Center in Wroclaw. I have 2 questions. The first is about this change of the paradigms considering the homogeneity and diversity. I wanted to ask you, how do you think, when did it start? I remember that in your presentation it was written in 1968. I wanted to ask you to elaborate on that. And the second question concerns the Judeo-Christian heritage of Europe. You said that it's not something distinctive for Europe. I agree that it doesn't play a special role right now, but I wanted to ask you why do you think it's not something special for Europe? Why it couldn't be an important part of the European identity, so to say?
Thank you, Milo.
Thank you.
Shall I collect one or two more, or how would you proceed typically? What's the tradition of this group? By now you have a tradition. Okay, then I won't collect and answer directly. Two good questions. I think the first one is the more difficult one to address properly, and I will begin with the second one for that reason. I think the Christian heritage, as you know, this was the only proper debate along strong normative lines in the context of constitution making. So that was the most lively, most intense debate in this respect, and of course in this sense you're right that there must be something. If there is a debate on it, there is a meaning which people feel attached to, either in negative or in positive terms, right? But again, I would say if you call it the Christian heritage, the easy point of escape for me here now is really, again, the news of the last couple of weeks. We have an Argentinian Pope, you see. And Christianity is becoming, as so many other things, something which is more and more globalized. So the fact that Europe has some specific cultural patterns becomes more relative due to the fact that these patterns have been exported at some point. They're coming back now from Argentina, Australia, South Asia, wherever. So I do see, of course, if you tell me that there is an impact of Christianity on European history, I would be the last to deny this. That's more than obvious. But I don't see any particularly relevant of this in terms of European identity or something that should be reflected. Even from a Christian point of view in European identity, it would be excluding other Christians somehow from our common endeavor, which is humanity or even heaven, right? So it's not European in the strict sense. The second question is more difficult indeed, and I think the first question, which is the second one I'm responding to. When and why did the change of paradigm happen? I think there are many ways of answering this question. There is one interesting guy you may have stumbled into at some point, a British Marxist Catholic literary critic called Terry Eagleton. And he once published a book called, and that's one possible answer to your question, Multiculturalism, the ideology of late capitalism or of neoliberalism, something like that, you see. I think his point would be, and you may misinterpret me in these terms, I do not share his approach at all, right? That the rise of certain types of identity politics, that's the typical argument made on some sides of the political map, especially also in France. Identity politics would be something which, in a way, distracts us. Either that's Eagleton from the proper thing we have to be fighting capitalism, right? That's Marx. Let's give the Irish workers a pacifier so that they struggle for class liberation and forget that they are Irish after all. That would be the Marxist approach, and that's something which still reverberates both in some leftish circles, a la Eagleton and so on. I don't know how it is in Florence and in Warsaw, but you may know people of this sort there too. And then also, this is a very common topic in some brands of republicanism, that they would say the common good is something which has to be kept antiseptically cleansed from all kinds of identities which would not matter there. So you have to forget that you're a woman, that you are an Arab, that you are a Christian, whatever. If you are in public space, then you become kind of identity free. I think that doesn't work. So, but you could say that to answer your question now, the point of inflection are the late 60s, in the sense that the dominance of simple, that's again one point which works in favor of my term complex diversity. The simple diversities of class politics, of simple religious cleavages. You know, in Germany in 1968, if you told me that you are that you are a worker from Bochum or from Essen, or if you told me that you are a Catholic from Bavaria, I could predict with a 98% probability what you would vote. Right? It's really true. I can't do that anymore. You tell me now that you are a 27-year-old worker from Bochum, you may have even Polish origin. This doesn't mean anything at all, you see. So you can vote for the neo-fascists, for the Social Democrats, even for the Greens. I don't know. There are some probabilities, but very marginal. So I think that the main contradiction has disappeared, and there is a shift, and that's a big debate also in the normative context, a shift from issues of distribution or redistribution to indeed recognition. You see, it's not so much about how much we get. There is this classic definition of politics too. Politics is about how much you get, when and how and so on. It's not about that anymore. It's also about how much you get as a specific member of a community or of a group and so on. It's about different approaches of being just and fair. And I do think that this is indeed, I think that's the most powerful revolution since the Reformation. I think 1968 has been a global breakthrough in this respect. This is an approach some people would not share, but I do think it has changed our world massively, and in this very direction, you see. And I could keep talking about this for a long time, as you noticed already, but I will leave it here. Yes, please. Also, please, I know who you are, but maybe just...
Alexandra, I'm doing my PhD at the University of Granada in Spain. I'm from Poland originally, and I was very interested, especially by the last part of your presentation when you were analyzing the impact of the crisis on the perceptions of intra-European migration, because this is a topic that I have been working on also for some time, and I was wondering how, because I think there's one relevant perspective or one relevant issue to this differential response to intra-European migration, which is the question of class and ethnicity. So I don't know if you somehow integrate these intersections of different categories of social differentiation in your approach to that, and I think that might be explain a lot in how the answers or the responses are different, obviously.
That was almost a comment, which I would share, you see. So I think you're right in two senses. In the first place, I think we know, it's strikingly little we know about intra-European migration. It's a field which has been, for reasons that escape my knowledge, it's been studied, of course, but there is much less. Or let's say, if you look at the classical countries of intra-EU migration, Belgium, Germany and so on, France to some extent, there is much less on intra-EU migrants than on Turks, Arabs and all kinds of groups which are as good or as bad. It's not about being better or worse. It's just that they have not been the focus of attention at all, and it turns out that in many respects they have specific patterns which very much are then linked to the two variables you mentioned, class and ethnicity, which escape then our attention, and then we don't know enough about them, you see. So this again is something which links to complex diversity in the sense that the very weight of social categories which we normally apply in all kinds of assessment of people. So you would assume basically if you hear about immigrants from Turkey in Germany would more or less automatically imply that they are lower class, which is not totally true anymore either, you see. So we have a strange conflation of expectations of how some social category will interact with another one. So, for example, ethnicity, nationality, class, and so on. And then it doesn't work really in specific cases, but we do not know enough about that. I would like to know more about, for example, this I could tell you from what I know due to my recent research that you have a very low wage differential within the community of highly skilled people in Germany, irrespective of their background, right? So a Spanish engineer moving to Germany will only earn 10% less, approximately, than his German colleague, and after a couple of years, he will earn as much, and so on. This you do have. But then you do not know much about how, for example, let's change a Spanish engineer for a Romanian doctor, for example, how the wage differential is related or not related to other aspects of social and even systemic integration. So recognition in terms of his professional skills. How do you feel? Is your environment treating you as a Romanian doctor? So this there is virtually nothing about it, or it totally escapes my attention. I don't know. So I encourage you to work along these lines. Yes.
My name is Tamara. I'm doing a PhD at Central European University in Budapest, and I have a very non-question question, just a sort of a way to get a comment out of you, which is not so much related to the presentation as it is related to the readings that you have assigned.
Yes.
One of the readings that your presentation was in many ways very negative, or
That's my job.
if I was to evaluate it, I would evaluate it as very, very negative in terms of many things, one of them seemingly being the democratization of European public space. Yet you assigned as a reading Tully's reading, which is a very optimistic, very positive text on how easy it is to create this more democratic, inclusive space. And to me, I mean, I'm in a certain way very Arendtian, so it was very appealing, but it also seemed tremendously naive, this whole text and the whole idea. So I wanted to ask you a bit more about your stance on this. How, well, given your presentation, I would assume that the stance on the possibility of a European democratic space is also very negative, but I'm very interested in your comment on this, your opinion on this.
I'm sorry for having been negative. That was not my intention. You know, this is une boutade, as we say in French. How do we say this in English? Une boutade is une boutade, right? In whatever language you... But I don't know how often I have said this old Gramscian saying of pessimism of reason, optimism of the will, you see. So I think that's the way we have to adopt. We have to see things as they are and then try to make the best of it. And I'm not negative in the sense that I think that we are approaching the end of the world. That was a couple of months ago. And then it didn't happen, as you remember. So I'm not saying that. But I think I'm radically sobered by a specific way of doing political science, for example, you see. So I think if I wanted to be very polemic, and I can be polemic here because I know the few people who are my colleagues and I will not offend them, and others are not here, I sometimes really wonder myself, what are we paid for? What have we been doing over the last 30 years? And what remains of that? So I have journals which I'm still subscribed to, which I am too lazy to cancel. I have not opened them for years because they're still in plastic envelopes. Because I know there is nothing I will possibly learn about the outside world if I look at the exercises which are being done there. So people have become, in this respect, I'm also an Arendtian, you see. I'm still interested in politics, and not only in political science, right? And we are, in a way, we are becoming too self-referential in the way we work. So we are creating spots for allocating jobs for ourselves, but we forget about what's going on outside, and there's a big problem. And we are also making a poor job than as scholars, after all. So that's what I'm saying. But it was just a brief detour. I think that what strikes me now to be more maybe not positive but more realistic, right, is that there of course are plenty of indicators showing that there are incipient ways of articulating transnational identities. There is all kinds of mobilization on specific issues all over the place, be it in Central Eastern Europe, of a more nasty kind, of course, but still there, people at least react. Of a more, if you want, progressive kind, the European Social Forum, the World Social Forum, the Indignados in Spain, there is plenty of stuff going on. There are just two things which strike me. On the one hand, and that's nothing new either, there's a truism, right? So there is a massive lack of political articulation of these movements. So the people move, but they don't know where they are moving because nobody is telling them. And then nobody tells them because those who might want to tell them don't know either. It's very difficult to articulate this kind of structure into something coherent, not to say cohesive, right? So that's one observation. But this may be just a question of time. Right? And maybe it will happen anyway. The second thing, which is maybe more relevant in this context then, is that if I'm not totally wrong, there is nothing at all. That's the point I wanted to make in my presentation. I didn't make it, so thanks for the question. There is not the slightest indicator, as far as I can tell, that there is something as a pro-European mobilization of whoever against all these kinds of Eurosceptic, or even worse, anti-EU movements. They do articulate, to some extent, what they dislike, and quite massively, quite powerfully. I find it surprising that those of us who might be more, let's say, interested in keeping the thing going for different reasons, that we are not able or apparently even interested in coming up with something as powerful or with a response to that. So there is no social agent which would address these issues. And this is, again, it's almost an academic question. So how come that what Karl Deutsch and other people called social mobilization for the period of nationalism doesn't happen in the context of European politics? And that's, of course, what then leads to this odd academic work a la Habermas and Beck, who I do respect, though, right? Who tend to conflate empirical analysis and normative expectations. And Habermas begins to hate people because they are not European enough, and Beck sees cosmopolitanism all over the place, you see. So that's not how it goes, unfortunately. So the question is the non-event. How can you explain that something which is apparently quite good, after all, for many people, and even the Eurostars and so on, the shuttle people, they don't mobilize, they don't articulate their interest in being European in a powerful political context. So I don't have the answer to that question. Maybe you have.
No.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sorry, my name is Nora. I'm coming from London. I'm working on European citizenship and intra-EU migrants, and I was just wondering whether then you're describing market citizenship in the EU. In other words, we didn't move forward since '92, but we still, it's mainly about economics and intra-EU migration based on rights. We don't need identity, we don't need participation, because, as you said at the end, it's all about individualistic, rational choices. Thanks.
Yes. That also was some kind of comment, which I would of course it depends on how you frame the whole thing. You see, so I have a friend who you may know too, in Jan van Müller, a political theorist in Princeton, who has worked a lot on Europe too, and he would tell me, Peter, you are too maximalistic in your expectations. You should be happy with what you got. It's really a great thing that we can move from Germany to London and from London to Finland, and just to have these choices is a great thing, and we should not ask for more. Let's be happy with that. Right? I agree. But obviously, it is not enough to, even if you have this instrumentalist approach to it, so let's call it market and consumer citizenship. And let's admit also that the EU has been doing a lot of good things in that respect. So it's great that we have some rights as migrants within Europe. It's great that we have some rights as consumers of of all kinds of goods all over Europe, irrespective of where we are. So, but then we should still face the problem that these good things will not hold in the long run if there is not some kind of minimum passion which is non-instrumental sustaining them. So people, to get good things, that's what persons call the deferred gratification pattern. You have to be able to invest into something for non-instrumental reasons too. Otherwise, you will lose the very market you are so fond of. So even if you adopt this kind of neoliberal approach to integration, you need something else than pure instrumental reason to keep it going. That would be my response to that, or my comment, your comment rather. How much time have we still left? I don't even know the 1:30. So would you like to go more into the readings, or what would you like to do? So somebody, at least you read Tully, you mentioned that, and I was also I chose him deliberately because he was giving a more positive approach to the whole thing.
Yeah, he has a very optimistic. I found it personally too optimistic, and it's not the time. I mean, whoever works on European identity is I assume in 90% pro-European identity and pro-European integration. But I found the text utterly naive and completely ignoring anything that is political about European integration. Because what it says is, at least it seemed to me, please correct me if I'm mistaken on this, but what it says basically is that it's so easy to establish this democratic sphere of Europe, and it's already there to some extent. We just need to bring it more to the fore, and apparently it's in everybody's interest, but it is not in everybody's interest, and I think there is a reason why this process is going so slowly. So I was in a way I was pretty amused by the text, and I really enjoyed it, because I am very idealistic myself, but on the other hand I was very annoyed by the fact that he completely ignores any sort of political reality. At least that's how I understood the text.
Well, I think he would not like hearing that, but of course he's not an expert on European integration either. He has a view from Canada, you see. I think one thing which again, to get back to the proper topic of my talk, and I have not mentioned this at all so far, so let me do it now. I think one thing which we lack in the field of European studies, or of EU studies rather than European studies, for reasons which I tried to detect initially, is we lack sense of historicity and of sense of space and time, see, because after all, there are other things not too different from Europe, which we might want to be informed about, which may be as complicated, complex, good, bad, working or not working as the EU is, and we don't invest too much time to study them properly. Complex federations of all kinds, be it, for example, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that would be a good case in point. Also, India would be a good case in point, so the Indian Federation. To some extent, Canada, you see. So there have been problems related to identity now, all the time, which are quite similar in this respect, and which people in EU studies have tended to ignore because we have been taught from the beginning that Europe is so specific and new and different. That's not true, come on, you see. So that's just a way of immunizing yourself against history by telling that you are creating something which has this is this sui generis thing, you see. Nothing is sui generis, because nothing can be disconnected from history and from space and time anyway. So that's the one thing which I think we should be more eagerly approaching the comparative angle to identity studies. If we look at Europe, what other cases may have offered similar syndromes in history or even at present when it comes to creating common ties beyond pure instrumental links? That's the one thing, and the second thing is to be again, to be more... Let me maybe link the first point to the second. You see, so you can be an expert on environmental policy, even some specific area of environmental policy. Is somebody doing environmental policy here, by the way? No. But let's say that you are doing air pollution regulation in Europe, and that's a typical PhD topic in European Union studies. So air regulation policies, implementation strategies, Greece compared to Sweden and France, so to speak. And you will see that you have a similar, that's a typical comparative design, you have a similar set of regulations which should be applied uniformly across 3 states, and then you will see that the outcomes are radically different or not. It depends, and then you look for dependent, independent variable, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's fine with me, you see. Go ahead with that. But the interesting thing that happens in the context of Europe is that quite often this kind of problem, the implementation problem in this respect, and even more now with the financial crisis, becomes linked to issues which are substantially not only political, but even polity critical. So that the way of how you regulate pollution in Athens as compared to Berlin may have an impact which makes the whole thing questioned after all. So the Greeks may tell, we don't want the Germans to tell us how we have to deal with our air. It's our air, not theirs, you see. So shut up. That's quite a typical way of dealing with policy technicalities in ways which then are open to identity politics too, you see. So that's something which happens all the time. For example, in Canada, between Quebec and the rest of Canada, in India, between southern and northern states. So that's quite obvious too. And then there may be ways of dealing with that or not. You see, you have to look at that and compare, and you will see that Europe is not that extraordinarily unique and different and an objet politique non-identifié, that was Delors' way of putting it, the sui generis discourse, multi-level governance, blah, 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 blah. Yes, of course, but it's not enough to get stuck there all the time and let's say, replicate the technocratic jargon of your object of studies in your own approach. You have to bring the politics back in. That would be my methodological suggestions for you. Politics is a method. Yes?
I have a question about your text, chapter number 3 from your book. Yeah. Where you're talking about distinctive features of cultural pluralism in the European multinational community. And there's one passage where you say that the goal is to, well, the goal of the European Union is to secure at least a symbolic presence of all member states in the Commission, and thus structural characteristics nourished by the logic of thin nationalism remain securely anchored even in a supranational institutional context. And I was wondering if you could enlarge a bit more on this concept of thin nationalism, because I do have a problem with the whole idea of the fact that the European Union is composed of nation states, and that we kind of have to transcend that, and that we have to get over it, and that, that the nation state is a problem because there's nationalism. I have a problem with, constantly bringing these two concepts together and saying that the nation state can't exist without some really negatively connotated version of nationalism, because that's what it usually is, right? It's negatively connotated, and it's always, when we think of Ulrich Beck and the whole idea of cosmopolitanism, is that we have to get over it because it still is a threat, and we can always, go back to what happened in the last century, really.
Thanks. I think that's an excellent point, you see, and I wonder whether you're British, because it's a very typical point you may hear often in the context of the UK, also in Northern Europe, and also Eastern Europe. Of course, the problem which you have if you approach the whole issue of nationalism from a German context, right, is that you, in a way, it's the fallacy of which Habermas and Beck are often not aware, that they repeat the mistakes of the past in the opposite sense, so that they now tend to assume that as Germany has this kind of horrible legacy with its own national project, the rest of the world has to share in this guilt, and we have to apply our strategies of self-improvement to everybody else. And of course, there may be nationalisms which are far less problematic and traumatic than the German has been. I totally agree with you on that. And I have nothing, no, don't misunderstand me. I'm not an anti-nationalist. I am not a nationalist and I'm not an anti. I am agnostic, really. I'm agnostic, and I think that we are on the same side in this respect. But we have to be aware, having said this, you see, so I have no problem with accepting the importance and even the value of national attachments to some extent, that typically, and with very few exceptions, national projects tend to be contested too, right? That the way that France or Germany nowadays, and even more so in the past, Italy and so on exist, it's a plural, is nothing which we should take for granted either. So the fact that we have an intense debate on the wanting finality of the European project, we don't know what Europe is about ultimately. This does not mean that we would have known beforehand, and even now I do not know why Germany exists, for example. Can you tell me why there is a Germany? I don't know. Why is there a United Kingdom? So for most people there seems to be something natural in it. It's not. You see, Italy is as problematic as a historical project, and even in its consequences, maybe even worse than the European Union, for example. And people feel quite at ease, normally, with a few and even significant exceptions, with being Italian. Why is this so? It is because of the very weight of thin nationalism in a specific institutional setting. And it's because of the power of mechanisms of institutional reproduction in our minds, you see. So what I call thin nationalism, and to some extent this overlaps with the concept of methodological nationalism, which has been brought up by two social anthropologists, Andrei and Friedrich-Schiller, some 10 years ago, and then adopted by other people. I think it's a good concept, or maybe it's even older than that. That's where I have it from. I think what this concept shows us and teaches us is that this kind of framing political, the map of Europe, which I was showing you, is something we take for granted, you see. So you don't wonder why there is a blue spot in the middle of the north called Sweden. You just assume that Sweden has been there for a while and it will continue there. This is not true. No, Sweden, I bet that Sweden in some time will have disappeared again, and so will Germany and everything. So, of course, we have to be aware of the longue durée, we have to be aware of the resilience of large structures, but I think that if my assessment holds, this resilience is becoming more and more heavily problematized too by some people, so that things tend to last less than they used to last some time ago, and especially political attachments. So I do think that in a more abstract way, even in a meta-theoretical way, it is very important to find ways of getting over being British and German and whatever else you may want to be or not be, Scottish, Catalan, Turkish, Kurdish, and so on. I respect this. I recognize you as a Kurd or as a Brit, whatever you want to be. But we still need ways of articulating something beyond that, because it will not hold, and we have problems which we have to tackle together, you see. And the way the EU is tackling them is not exactly conducive to getting to the point I would like to get to with some other people, for reasons of methodological nationalism being built into the very structure of it. Yep, I'm talking too much, you're talking too little. That's a typical teacher-class situation. Shall we try to get over it? Would you like to teach me something? Do we have any more questions or remarks to maybe also if you try to find some kind of interim balance of what has been going on here over the last couple of days? How does it fit together? How does it not fit together? I'm curious. I'm almost asking you now. Yes? And please tell me who you are.
I am Pawan from India. Okay. And in one of your articles, you remarked that Europe should take inspiration from India. But I think, however, this should not be the case, because Indian diversity is different from European diversity. We are more multicultural, whereas EU is more multinational. So I think these two cannot be a point of comparison as such.
What cannot be? Sorry, I did not get the last point. What
when
cannot
you say
be?
that Europe's situation is not as exceptional, and there are some inspirations for defining their understanding of the politics of diversity. And then you mentioned India.
Yes.
So my contention is that India is a multicultural state, and European Union is, or Europe is a multinational state. So these two cannot be bracketed in one category as such.
May I, just to make sure that I got the point properly, so you are telling me that Europe is a multinationalist state, and India is a multinational state. Yeah. So you are making an opposition between national and nationalist, right?
No, multinational and multicultural.
Multicultural, sorry, I did not, okay, now I got the point. Well, you know more about this than I do, you see, so for obvious reasons. I was struck by some stuff I was reading by your great, sorry? Yes, who writes about ways of being Indian and being, again, united in diversity, and the talkative Indian is the title of the book. It's about deliberation. Anyway, so I'm not sure, you see, I agree with you that, of course, the very notion of the national, you see, is not applicable to the Indian context in the way it would apply to Europe. I even have learned now, I'm totally fascinated by this because I've worked myself a lot, and I'm so interested in language politics and language politics, that even the concept of language in India does not apply in the same way as it would apply in Europe. So that this link between collective identities of a proto-national kind and language in India never was framed in analogous logics than it has been in Europe. But as you see, we're already comparing, and we are comparing with some kind of interesting outcomes. So I think from the European perspective, it would be good to know how is it then that in India different types of linguistic, religious, ethnic, also class attachment, because the caste system has many elements which are culturally interwoven with it too, you see. So how is it that it leads to totally different political outcomes than those which we have in Europe? And what could we do to get more maybe into that direction? The same way that you might be interested in finding an approach to dealing with religious diversity, which is more secular, sorry for putting it this way, than the way you have been used to at least in the last 20 years or so. You see, you are not back to the split between Pakistan and India, but still it's a massive cleavage between especially Islamic and non-Islamic Indians or Hindu Indians that we would not have at the same level of intensity in Europe, as far as I can tell. So I think at least it would be interesting to sit together and to see how specific elements of common citizenship work more or less well in different, of course, in different contexts. But I very much appreciate your comment. I agree. I just think that you can compare different things too, you see, productively. Are you okay with? Yes.
We had this debate. I know this is not necessarily part of today's presentation, or yours at least. We had this debate about qualitative and quantitative approaches to assessing identity, and I was just wondering which one would you support and why?
Well, this is not a football match. You see, I know who I support in football normally, and we even talked about it in the break. I think it depends on what you want to do. I think that for my own type of research, for the things I do, right, I have basically to rely on qualitative strategies. I have no other option. I cannot find out what I want, what I would like to find out. Even with the tools, I can use them in terms of ethnographic approaches and discourse analysis. Even this has limits to getting into, let's say, the deep hermeneutic angle you would like to be able to apply in our kind of research. But I do think that, of course, in many respects, we only can come up with the questions which then I'd like to take up and to follow in this direction if we have some hints at more aggregate phenomena which you only can get from quantitative researchers. So, of course, the Eurobarometer is the worst case in point you can give when it comes to identity research, right? But even the Eurobarometer would show you that then they stopped with the question, as you know. But it would show you that over 3 decades there has no European identity has not been emerging at all. Rather the opposite. So it has been even going down. So you get unexpected developments if you apply a crude functionalist logic. You can see that although all kind of efforts have taken place, there is no identity, so why? And then you begin doing the type of research I would like to do. But you need both. And I think you will get also good, on different aspects of what I've been trying to sketch out here very vaguely, like legitimacy, for example. Also specific linguistic skills you do need. You need quantitative research. You cannot get the data you need if you don't have it. So we need both. I do not see a stark contrast, you see. It depends very much on what you cannot play football and dance ballet at the same time. That's difficult to do. But I think there are good moments for football and good moments for ballet, and now you may want to choose what is what in this respect. Yes.
My name is Hannes from Stuttgart. I was wondering how you see the role of an outgroup or a threat from the outside on the formation of identities. I remember a quotation from Garibaldi, if I remember it right, but maybe the Italians can correct me here, who said that after the unification of Italy, he said, now we have created Italy, but we still have to create the Italians. And I think that pretty much applies to all nation states, but then they had to fight these wars against other nations, and so it was easy to say who we are for the nations because they had clear images of who we are not. So yeah, maybe I don't know how you see the role of a threat from the outside or of a missing threat from the outside in the making or not making of an identity for Europeans.
Again, a very good question. The quote you give, that's typically one of the most quoted things ever. It's the correct reference is not Garibaldi, it's not Cavour, it's Massimo d'Azeglio, also a Risorgimento guy. Who the quote is abbiamo fatto l'Italia, adesso dobbiamo fare gli italiani. We made Italy, now we have to make Italians. So that's how it goes, but it's the same context. And of course, the best book about that thing, and I recommend it to everybody who wants to understand what identity formation in the strong sense is, in this kind of sense, creating people, it's Eugene Weber's Peasants into Frenchmen, you see. So you see how basically the Republican school system and conscription in late 19th century France created French people, right, who would not exist before that in systematic and targeted ways, with surprisingly strong outcomes which still survive into the present. So most French people I know are very self-consciously French in ways we would not expect in other parts of Europe. So, and of course the French fought many wars, both externally and then even internally. They killed the king. That's a great thing to do, you see. I would be happy if more people had done this in Europe at some point in time. Nothing against the UK, though, right? You just keep your queen alive and kicking. So I think that the passions which are in all kinds of identity projects, of course, are to a high degree connected with the amount of corpses we keep in our cupboards, right? I think that's a truism in a way. The more bloody your history has been, you could possibly speculate, the thicker the ties you end up developing as the both object and subject of this history. But I wonder whether this is not again a story being told by specific people, a story told too often by people from France, from Germany, from the great nations who fought all these wars and who have this kind of bloody histories and corpses in their cupboards. I think there are many other peoples, like the Swiss have never fought a single external war, yes, a long time ago, against the Austrians, and they had the civil war in the 1830s, but a very minor thing. India is you had a war with Pakistan, if you want, but that was not it was nothing which was conducive to Indian identity. There was something which was older than that, you see. You have Canada. Canada is the most boring national history you can tell. Nothing happened ever in Canada. And they still feel Canadian to a great extent. So you may have some kind of functional equivalence for that, and then again you have to find out. It's an empirical question after all. How come that some people need to be more bloody than others to develop some kind of stable or democratic or whatever you want to get identity? Right? I think there is no theoretical answer to that question. It's a contingent outcome of politics.
Perfect timing. Shall we finish?